Burkina Faso exported gold and raw materials, yet still depended on foreign systems to move people, power, factories, process food, and store government data. Now Ibrahim Traoré is trying to reverse that equation through 9 projects. New roads and 530 buses are meant to move people and goods. New power, water, industrial, medical, and digital infrastructure is meant to bring capability under Burkinabe control. The message is bigger than construction. Burkina Faso wants to rely less on Western supply chains, foreign technology, and decisions made outside Africa, and build more of what the country needs at home. But concrete alone does not create freedom. Real self-reliance begins when local workers can operate the systems, repair the machines, supply the inputs, and keep everything running without waiting for outside rescue. So are these 9 projects new infrastructure, or the first attempt to break Burkina Faso's cycle of dependence? Before sunrise in Ouagadougou, a trader can lose part of the day before the first sale is made. Traffic slows the motorcycle. A delivery truck arrives late. Fuel is burned while goods sit still. That is why the first project is not only about asphalt. In May 2026, Burkina Faso officially opened 8 strategic road axes and structures in the capital, covering more than 22 kilometers. The package included the Northern Ring Road, a flyover, rehabilitated avenues, drainage works, and access roads serving administrative, security, and economic zones. On paper, roads move vehicles. In a self-reliant economy, they must move value. A farmer needs a route to the market. A factory needs raw materials to arrive on time. A local product cannot replace an imported one if transport makes it slower or more expensive before reaching the buyer. This is where Traoré's larger message appears. Burkina Faso cannot reduce dependence on foreign supply chains while its own internal connections remain weak. Producing more at home means little if congestion-damaged roads, flooding, and delays keep local producers from competing. The Northern Ring Road is especially important because it is designed to improve urban and through traffic. Rehabilitated drainage also matters because a road that disappears underwater is not reliable infrastructure. But this project reveals an uncomfortable truth about self-reliance. The reported investment exceeded 40 billion CFA francs and was mobilized through the state with financial partners including the West African Development Bank and Vista Bank. That does not make the roads meaningless. It shows that independence is not isolation. The real question is whether Burkina Faso controls the priorities, develops local construction and maintenance capacity, and uses the infrastructure to strengthen domestic production rather than deepen another cycle of debt and dependency. The road is therefore the first test. Can it shorten journeys? Can it lower logistics costs? Can Burkinabe workers maintain it? And can it connect farms, factories, and markets strongly enough to make products built at home more competitive? Because the next project depends on exactly that connection, keeping a national route open when the water rises. A country can build factories and farms, yet lose control of its economy at a single flooded crossing. That was the danger at Ouagadougou. When the old bridge on National Road 1 was submerged, traffic could be disrupted on one of Burkina Faso's most strategic corridors. Trucks carrying food, fuel, construction materials, and industrial inputs could be delayed by the river itself. In June 2026, a new bridge was opened across the Grand Valley. The structure spans 72 meters, stands nearly 5 meters higher than the previous crossing, and was designed to keep traffic moving during periods of high water. More importantly for Traoré's self-reliance message, the project was financed entirely by the Burkinabe state. That makes this bridge more than a transport upgrade. It is an attempt to regain control over a route that connects communities, markets, and trade beyond the country's borders. When a road closes, the damage does not stop at the riverbank. A farmer may miss a buyer. A shop may wait longer for supplies. A factory may pay more for delayed inputs. And imported goods can become even more expensive before reaching families. A reliable bridge reduces that vulnerability. But sovereignty is not guaranteed by pouring concrete once. Heavy trucks must respect weight limits. Drainage structures must remain clear. Safety barriers, road surfaces, and supporting works must be inspected before small failures become another national blockage. The bridge was completed in 10 months, at a reported cost of more than 4.5 billion CFA francs. The real return on that investment will be measured during future rainy seasons, when water rises and traffic continues instead of stopping. That is the deeper pattern behind Burkina Faso's infrastructure push. Self-reliance is not only producing more goods at home, it is protecting the routes that allow those goods to move. The next project takes that test from cargo corridors into ordinary daily life. And once the road remains open, another question appears. Who can actually use it? Because a national transport system is not complete until students, workers, and families can move affordably every day. A new road changes little for a student who cannot afford the journey across the city. That is why Burkina Faso's next project is not another bridge or highway. It is 530 buses. In January 2026, the government delivered a second batch of 375 vehicles to Sotraco, bringing the recent total to 530. The program was designed to strengthen public transport and improve access for students, workers, and families. For a passenger, the impact is measured in minutes and money. A reliable bus can reduce the cost of reaching school. It can connect a worker to an industrial zone. It can allow a market seller to carry goods without paying for several motorcycle trips. In that sense, public transport becomes part of economic self-reliance. A country cannot build domestic factories while large numbers of workers struggle to reach them. It cannot expand education if transport quietly blocks attendance. And it cannot reduce dependence on imported goods if local producers and consumers remain disconnected inside their cities. But the buses also expose the difference between purchasing equipment and controlling a system. Every vehicle needs fuel, tires, filters, batteries, replacement parts, train drivers, mechanics, depots, and disciplined scheduling. If those inputs remain difficult to obtain locally, a fleet can slowly shrink, even while the official number remains impressive. Burkina Faso's government emphasized rigorous preventive and professional management when the vehicles were delivered. That warning matters. The strongest symbol of transport sovereignty will not be 530 buses parked for a ceremony. It will be hundreds of buses running years later on dependable routes at prices ordinary people can afford. The deeper goal should therefore move beyond acquisition. Local technicians must master maintenance. Spare parts supply must become predictable. Routes must reach the people who need them most. And the system must generate enough revenue to survive without excluding low-income passengers. The roads are opening. The fleet is growing. Now the next question is whether Burkina Faso can produce the power needed to keep homes, workshops, factories, and this transport system moving. When electricity disappears, dependence becomes visible in seconds. A welding shop falls silent. A mill stops turning. A factory switches to a generator. A clinic begins protecting its most essential equipment. That is why the next project carries more weight than its size suggests. In July 2026, Burkina Faso inaugurated the emergency thermal power plant at Traore. Built in 90 days instead of the contracted 120, the plant added 50 megawatts of national generation capacity at a reported cost of 18 billion CFA francs. The speed was dramatic. The political message was even clearer. For years, Burkina Faso relied heavily on imported electricity, leaving homes and businesses exposed to production problems and supply disruptions beyond its borders. Traore represents an attempt to reverse that vulnerability by producing more electricity inside the country. Without power, roads cannot support industry for long. Buses need workshops. Factories need motors, refrigeration pumps, lighting, and digital systems. Hospitals need dependable equipment. Data centers cannot protect national information if the electricity feeding them repeatedly fails. Reliable power also determines whether local products can compete against imports on price. But 50 megawatts does not equal energy independence. A thermal plant still needs fuel maintenance replacement parts, trained technicians, and a grid capable of carrying the electricity where demand is growing. If fuel costs rise or critical components remain difficult to replace, one form of external dependence can return through another door. The test is therefore not only whether the engines can start, it is whether Burkina Faso can operate them reliably, finance their running costs, train local teams, and gradually build a broader energy mix that is less vulnerable to outside shocks. The government says Pabre is the first step in a larger program expected to add more than 220 megawatts through additional plants in several cities. That ambition could give farms, workshops, and industries more room to expand. But electricity alone cannot create production. Machines need raw materials. Farmers need water. And the next national project begins with the resource no factory, village, or food system can survive without. Water can expose dependence before a single import reaches the border. When a reservoir fills with sediment, farmers lose irrigation, livestock lose drinking water, fishing declines, and villages become more vulnerable to the next dry season. That is why Burkina Faso has launched a national program to dredge and reinforce 100 dams. The campaign covers 12 of the country's 17 regions and aims to recover at least 50 million cubic meters of additional water storage. The state finance program represents more than 19 billion CFA francs. But the real story is not the number of dams. It is what control over water allows Burkina Faso to produce locally. A restored reservoir can support vegetables, fruit trees, cattle, fish, and small businesses around the shoreline. It can give farmers more than one growing season and reduce the risk that a failed rainfall destroys an entire year of income. At Gonse, the launch site, decades of sediment had reduced the reservoir's original capacity. The planned works are intended to remove nearly 100,000 cubic meters of material and restore water supporting around 100 hectares cultivated by 200 farmers. This is self-reliance at its most basic. A country that cannot secure water cannot secure food. But dredging a reservoir once does not create water sovereignty. The banks must be protected from erosion. Drainage and spillways must be maintained. Communities must prevent new sediment from filling the basin. And access must be managed fairly so larger operators do not capture the water while smaller farmers remain exposed. The official timetable was ambitious: 100 dams implemented over an estimated 5 months. The lasting test will take much longer. Did storage capacity actually increase? Did farmers produce more? Did livestock and fisheries benefit? And were the restored structures still functioning after several rainy seasons? If the program succeeds, water will not remain trapped behind concrete. It will move through farms, markets, food processing plants, and household incomes. And one of the first industries waiting for that water is fish farming, where another hidden dependence begins with what the fish must eat every day. A full reservoir can create opportunity, but it cannot feed a single fish. Every cage, pond, and hatchery depends on one input: affordable, reliable feed. For years, that input remained one of the weakest links in Burkina Faso's fish farming strategy. Producers could install cages and stock young fish, yet face limited access to locally made feed. When feed must travel through foreign supply chains, prices, delays, and currency pressure can reach the farm before the fish reaches the market. In March 2026, Burkina Faso inaugurated industrial fish feed units in Bobo Dioulasso to produce more animal protein at home. The government mobilized more than 1.5 billion CFA francs to acquire 2 plants, one in Bobo Dioulasso and another in Bagre. Each was announced with a capacity of roughly 1.5 to 2 tons per hour. A third Bobo Dioulasso unit adds another ton per hour. The national ambition is much larger: 100,000 tons of fish. But that target is not yet a result. The factories must produce feed that farmers can afford, fish can digest efficiently, and distributors can deliver beyond large commercial sites. Quality matters because poor feed does more than waste money. It slows growth, lengthens production cycles, pollutes water, and can destroy the economics of a small farm. This is where self-reliance becomes practical. Burkina Faso is not trying merely to replace a foreign bag with a local bag. It is trying to control the knowledge formulation machinery, raw materials, quality testing, and distribution behind that bag. The state companies operating these units will therefore face a demanding test. Can local crops supply the ingredients? Can technicians maintain the machines? Can small fish farmers purchase manageable quantities? And can domestic feed compete with imports without shortages or hidden subsidies? Water creates the production space. Feed determines whether that space becomes food. If both systems work together, fish farming can support jobs markets and family diets. But the same lesson now moves on to dry land, where Burkina Faso is trying to turn locally grown maize into more valuable products before it leaves the region. A field of maize can feed a family, but the grain becomes far more valuable after it leaves the farm. It can become flour, semolina, brewing material, animal feed, packaged food, factory wages, and new markets for producers. That is the logic behind two agro-industrial plants inaugurated in Dédougou in May 2026. The first SODAF BM represents an investment of about 1.6 billion CFA francs. Its announced capacity is between 12,000 and 15,000 tons of maize each year, producing grits, semolina flour, and bran for animal feed. The second caber was reported at more than 1.2 billion CFA francs, with capacity to process cereals and sesame into flour, semolina brewing inputs, biscuits, and livestock feed. Together, the factories carry a message in Traore's self-reliance strategy. Burkina Faso should not remain a place where crops are grown. It must become a place where crops are transformed, packaged, sold, and turned into industrial knowledge. When maize is sold only as raw grain, farmers receive one payment. When it is processed locally, value can also reach mill operators, technicians, transporters, packaging suppliers, retailers, and livestock producers. But machines do not create that multiplier automatically. The plants need enough grain throughout the year. They need storage to prevent losses after harvest. They need electricity, working capital, packaging, maintenance, and customers for the products. And farmers need contracts that prevent industrial growth from pushing them into the weakest position in the chain. The official capacities describe what the factories are designed to process. They do not yet prove annual production, stable sales, or higher farmer incomes. That is the reality test. Can the factories run beyond harvest season? Can Burkina Faso technicians maintain the equipment? Can local brands compete with imports? And can the final price return to the communities that grew the maize? If the answer becomes yes, one bag of grain will stop leaving the farm as a low-value commodity. It will begin moving through a national industrial system. And the next project asks whether Burkina Faso can apply that logic to something even more essential: medical supplies. A hospital can have doctors' operating rooms and nurses, yet still be unable to perform a safe procedure because one disposable item is missing. A surgical gown, a sterile drape, a medical kit. For years, products this basic often had to arrive through supply chains Burkina Faso did not control. When international shipping slows, financing changes, or a supplier chooses another market, the shortage can reach an operating room before families understand what happened. That is the vulnerability Consumed Burkina was created to confront. In April 2026, the medical consumables factory was inaugurated in Bobo Dioulasso. Its announced capacity exceeds 1.5 million units each year, including surgical gowns, operating drapes, and medical kits. The facility includes a modern workshop, a clean room designed for sterile production, and a quality control laboratory. The message is direct. Burkina Faso should not depend indefinitely on distant suppliers for basic products its hospitals use every day. But medical sovereignty demands more than sewing fabric and placing a national label on the package. Materials must meet strict standards. Sterilization must be reliable. Every batch must be traceable. Hospitals must receive deliveries on time. And health workers must trust the product when a patient's safety depends on it. Consumed also reveals a more realistic path away from dependence. The factory emerged from cooperation between a Burkina Faso promoter and a Tunisian partner, combining local ownership with transferred technology skills and production standards. That is not isolation from the outside world. It is using partnership to build capability that remains inside Burkina Faso. The unanswered questions are practical. How much raw material will be sourced locally? Can the factory maintain quality at full scale? Will public hospitals purchase enough local products to sustain production? And can Burkina Faso teams eventually control maintenance, certification, and expansion? If those answers become positive, a surgical gown will represent something larger than fabric. It will represent a health system less exposed to decisions made abroad. But another form of sovereignty cannot be touched or worn. It lives inside servers, and the next project is designed to bring government data back under national control. A country can own roads, power plants, factories, and hospitals, yet still lose control through something invisible. Its data, tax records, identity systems, government platforms, public services, strategic information. When those systems are hosted outside national territory, another company, another jurisdiction, or another infrastructure network can become part of the country's decision-making chain. That is why Burkina Faso inaugurated 2 modular government data centers in Ouagadougou in January 2026. Together they were announced with 3,000 terabytes of storage, more than 100,000 gigabytes of memory, and enough computing capacity to host over 7,000 virtual machines. The government placed them inside a strategy called Zero Data Outside, designed to host, operate, secure, and gradually repatriate public data still stored beyond Burkina Faso. This may be the least visible of the 9 projects. It may also be one of the most strategic. A foreign server can be convenient, but convenience becomes vulnerability when access pricing, legal control maintenance, or political pressure is decided elsewhere. Bringing public data home can reduce that exposure. It can also support faster government platforms, digital services, and local technical employment. But a building filled with servers does not automatically create digital sovereignty. The centers need uninterrupted electricity cooling, cybersecurity backup systems, software updates, and highly trained engineers. They must survive equipment failures, cyber attacks, human mistakes, and future growth in public services. Burkina Faso must also decide who can access the information, how citizens' privacy is protected, and whether independent safeguards can prevent abuse inside the country itself. That is the reality test. Data sovereignty should not mean replacing foreign control with uncontrolled domestic surveillance. It should mean national capability, legal responsibility, strong security, and public trust. If Burkinabe engineers can operate, protect, repair, and expand these systems, the country will control more than machines. It will control part of its digital future without depending permanently on foreign hosting providers, external technicians, or political permission for essential public services. And now all 9 projects return to one final question. Can roads transport power, water industry, health, and data operate as one self-reliant national system? 9 projects can create the image of a country moving fast, but images do not build sovereignty. Systems do. A road matters when it carries goods to market. A bridge matters when it keeps that route open through the rainy season. Buses matter when students and workers can still afford the journey years after the handover. Power matters when factories no longer stop whenever electricity from outside becomes uncertain. Dams matter when water reaches farms, livestock, and fisheries. Feed plants matter when fish producers can buy reliable inputs without depending on distant suppliers. Maize factories matter when farmers receive fair prices and more value remains inside Burkina Faso. Medical production matters when hospitals can obtain supplies without waiting for foreign shipments. Data centers matter when Burkinabe engineers can protect public information, keep services online, and defend citizens' rights. This is what connects all 9 projects. They are attempts to move control closer to the people who depend on these systems every day. Yet the hardest stage begins after construction. Machines will need parts. Buses will need maintenance. Power stations will need fuel. Dams will need protection from new sediment. Factories will need buyers, working capital, and trained technicians. Hospitals will need confidence in local quality. Data centers will need electricity, cybersecurity, and public trust. If those supporting layers remain controlled, a broad dependency may survive beneath a new national label. That is why Traore's project cannot be judged only by how many structures are inaugurated. The real measure is whether Burkina Faso is climbing the capability ladder from importing finished products to operating imported equipment, to maintaining that equipment locally, to producing more components and inputs at home, and eventually designing systems that can be expanded by Burkinabe institutions and workers. This transformation will not happen in 1 year, and cooperation with other countries will not disappear. The question is, who sets the priorities, who gains the skills, who controls the decisions, and where the value remains when each project begins operating. For decades, Burkina Faso exported wealth while importing too much of the capability required to turn that wealth into security jobs and public services. These 9 projects are an attempt to reverse that pattern, not by closing the country to the world, but by entering the world with stronger domestic foundations. The ceremonies have happened. The machines have started. Now comes the part that will decide everything. Can Burkina Faso keep these systems working, connect them together, and build the next generation with more of its own knowledge, labor, and control? Share your verdict, tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe to Traore Rising Report as this national experiment continues. That is the real test of self-reliance. Disclaimer: this video is produced for documentary, educational, and analytical purposes. It examines officially announced projects, stated capacities, investment estimates, potential economic benefits, and implementation risks. The announced 120 megawatt capacity and estimated 133 billion CFA investment relate to a project that has been launched but has not yet been completed or commissioned. They should not be interpreted as verified operating output or final project cost. This analysis distinguishes between completed infrastructure, announced objectives, projected capacity, and results that still require verification over time. It does not claim that Burkina Faso has already achieved complete energy independence.